was hoping they weren't gonna start parking semis down there. It is 6:30, Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
No, even the pledge sounded good.
Yeah, we're gonna hire you as people to come and do our pledge all the time. It sounded pretty good tonight. All right, welcome everybody that's here. This is kind of nice to see. I think there's more people here than there's been for the last 20 years combined. So we're gonna start out with a police officer swearing in ceremony.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, and for those of you in the audience, I'm Shauna Johnson, and I'm the City Administrator here in Waite Park. And on behalf of the City of Waite Park and Chief Bentrude, who is on Zoom with us but wasn't able to be here this evening, I wanted to just take the opportunity to recognize some of our newest officers that have joined us over the course of the last year or so. With COVID, we have not really had the ability to officially do a swearing-in ceremony, and so with the help of Becca, we'd like to take that opportunity this evening to do so. So Becca, if you want to do that and call them all up, and we'll go from there.
All right. Hi, I'm Sergeant Becca Gross here with the Waite Park Police Department. So we'll just get going. First, we're going to go by seniority, get people up here. So Alex Zaboy is from Rosemont. He graduated SCSU in 2019. We hired him in August of 2020. David Callis is from Sartell, graduated from NDSU in 2014. He served in Royalton for about a year, and we hired him on in October of 2020. We have Hannah DeShepper. She's from Spicer, graduated Ridgewater in 2020. We hired her in January of 2021. Brent Fandel is from Sartell. He graduated SCSU in 2016. He served in Becker and St. Joseph for a combined total of about 3 years before he came to us. We hired him in June of 2021. Rebecca Okerstrom, she's from Coon Rapids, graduated from SCSU in 2019. We hired her in June of 2021. Quay Crawford is from White Bear Lake. He graduated Hennepin Tech in 2021, and we hired him as a full-time officer in August of 2021. Celeste Walls is from Litchfield. She graduated from UND in 2003. She served in St. Joseph for about 5.5 years, and we hired her in September of 2021. Cade Garkey is from St. Cloud. He graduated from Alexandria Technical and Community College in 2021, and we hired him in September of 2021.
So in today's world, we all know how hard it is to find some good employees, and is even more difficult to find police officers, especially good ones like we have. Knowing that these ladies and gentlemen risk their lives every day to protect and serve our community. The City of Waite Park has been very fortunate that we've been able to hire some of the finest officers, including all of you here this evening with us. And I would like to thank each and every one of you for your service. We look forward to you having a long career here in Waite Park, and we look forward to seeing where your next goals are going to take you. I also want to take the opportunity to thank your family members for the support that all of you give each of your officers here. If it wasn't for your love and support for them, I don't think it would be very easy for them to do their jobs. So thank you for your continued service, your commitment, and dedication to the City of Waite Park and the Waite Park Police Department. So with that, we're going to try to do this all together. And so what I'm going to have you do is I'm going to say this beginning part, and if you would respond afterwards by saying, "I will." All right, are we ready? If you would all please raise your right hand. I do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Minnesota, and I will faithfully discharge the duties of police officer within and for the City of Waite Park Police Department and the City of Waite Park, Minnesota. All right, and we're going to say the next part, and if you'd respond as well with that I will work in partnership with the public of the City of Waite Park toward providing a safe environment, enhancing the quality of life consistent with the values of our community? If so, respond with I will. That I will adhere to the ethical values of professionalism, integrity, responsiveness, sensitivity, respect, and openness. If so, say I will. That I will take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the officer on which I am about to enter. If so, say I will. Congratulations. Thank you.
Yeah, let's go.
And thank all of you. We appreciate you, and we appreciate the support that you give all of this. We do have some refreshments and some cake downstairs in the lower conference room that are available for all of you and your family members and any members of the public that would like to join. So thank you.
Yay.
All right, so families can follow on down.
You don't have to leave, you know, this is really exciting time now. I mean,
We have the financial audit coming up.
only 100 pages.
Yeah.
Those chairs,
Lot to
yeah,
get
they're
to.
all right.
Yeah.
Well, then you're not used to doing it.
I'm surprised that no part of that, they don't have to say their name.
Well, they can, but just because we have so many,
Oh,
we have them,
you just edit it? Okay.
and then they sign it. So
All right, is there anyone here for public input? 2-minute public input, anyone? Need you to give me your name and address, please.
My name is Bob Driscoll, and our address is 1501 County Road 137, Wade Park, Mint. Helen and I have been working on a couple years trying to reimagine Wade Park, going from Quarry Park to 28th Avenue with a whole scheme of projects and ideas for you. And today, or the last couple of weeks, we've been working with the big company out of Minneapolis that wants to get on board. So we're doing having completed soil borings and things. We're doing road layouts and stuff through Sam DeLeo and a feasibility study and stuff to see if we can't make this whole dream happen for Wade Park and something really exciting for you. And I put together kind of a scheme of ideas and things that we have done already over the last couple of years with phone calls and soil borings and et cetera. You can look that over. And if you have any questions, you can call us.
All right.
But I think it's really exciting, and I think it's going to really work well with the amphitheater and stuff that you have. It will be a great vision for you. The only thing we have a problem with, that if there's any kind of mining that would take place in that area, these developers would just walk because of the dirt, noise, and disruption it would do with our plan, and then we would have to change our whole scheme of what we got planned for you. Do you have any questions from Helen or I?
No,
No, if you
I
got
don't
anything,
think
if you
so.
got anything you want to leave us, that'd be great.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you've got a couple for other people you want to leave them, you can just give them to Carla and she makes sure that they get them.
There's some extras here, we got different names on them, but they're the same content, it's in there, it kind of lays out our vision.
All right,
Okay.
thank
Right.
you.
Thanks, Bob. Anyone else for public input?
Hello, Mark Sockery, 413 10th Avenue South, Waite Park, Minnesota. Just excited to see the possibilities of commercial amenities right near Quarry Park. We've spent many years on the county board kind of putting pieces together to have a very beautiful park, but you need more than that. Now that we have the amphitheater attracting lots and lots of visitors, the idea of having some upscale dining, hotel, motel development, it's really a nice thing to look forward to. And I hope the quarrying request doesn't go into the area that would spoil this plan, because a lot of work has gone into this. So, thanks.
All right.
Any questions?
No,
Thanks,
thank
Mark.
you.
Thank you.
Anyone else, public input? Anyone else? 2 minutes, free time. All right, thank you. Review and approve council agenda.
Mr. Mayor, just wanted to mention that I did add late this afternoon when I was told about the appointment of Bailey Roscoe as for the part-time CSO officer, that we had, council had authorized the hiring process for that a couple of months ago. Typically, part-time positions, it's not something that council gets involved in with interviews, but the recommendation would be to appoint her. That person did go through the civil service process as well.
That's under item C.
It's under item C under consent.
Yep.
I'll move to approve the agenda as amended.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passed unanimously. Consent agenda. Item A, approved donation resolution. Item B, approved change order for 2020 street project. And item C, appoint Bailey Roscoe, pay grade 3, step 1, to part-time CSO position.
Move to approve.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passed unanimously. Regular agenda, review the 2020 audit. There's only 100 pages and 3 hours, so.
Justin, do you mind if I do it on here?
Okay.
I have 5 participants on Zoom, so they may not be able to see your stuff, if you're okay with that. If you
Yeah.
just give me 1 second, and I'm gonna,
That works for me.
I gotta find it now.
You let me know when you're ready. Yeah.
Yep.
I saw the big crowd. I assumed this was here for me. But that's their loss, I guess, because they're missing all the good stuff.
Kind of disappointing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
All
Thank
right.
you.
So good evening. My name is Justin McGraw. I'm with CDS, the city's auditors, and I'm here tonight to present the December 31st, 2020 financial statements, our audit report. And you probably got a few different paper documents in front of you. The thin one here, I thought I'd cover, is the presentation I'm going to cover tonight. It's the format I'm going to follow. And all the information in there is derived from your actual financial statements, the large document you referenced earlier, as well as the management letter to the city. So if you're looking for a little more detail, anything I'm talking about tonight, the financial statements are a great place to start. As always, you can stop me and ask me questions as I'm going through it. So the first page, the first and second page, is a description of what our independent audit report is, the standards that we follow to determine if your financial statements are free from material misstatement. The responsibilities of both parties, us as auditors and you as the city. The big takeaway is on page 2, right at the top there. The financial statements are presented fairly, in our opinion. You can use them to gauge performance of the city, as well as for decision-making purposes. There's also other items in the financial statements that this references to. Your management discussion and analysis. It gives your team more of a narrative format to talk about some of the changes in the city's balances and the activity that happened during the year. And also at the end of my delivery tonight, I'm going to talk about internal controls of the city, how that financial information flows through the city. We issue a report on that as well. On page 3, we have your statement of net position. This is the overall balance sheet of the city. You can see here, we show 2020 and we match it up against 2019. So you can see some of the changes in your balances that happened during the year. Starting at the top, your current assets. These would be items like your cash balances, accounts receivable, those types of items. You did have an increase in 2020 compared to 2019. There's a few reasons for that. Some of it is increasing your overall cash balances just through operations of the city and primarily utility funds. Then the state of Minnesota's contribution for the amphitheater did come in 2020. So you saw some of that reimbursement come in from the expenses that you shouldered for 2019 in the big construction phase. The state paid their portion, and that did kind of build up your cash balances a little bit.
Just before you get too far down the line, will you explain to me what the OPEB liability is?
Yeah, so OPEB, yeah, it's the other post-employment benefits liability. It's for you, it's primarily health insurance. So when an employee retires from the city, by state statute, you have to allow them to stay on your health insurance. You don't have to make any contributions to the health insurance, but they do. They can stay on your health insurance, and because those are typically older individuals with a higher experience rating of health insurance costs and health care, you have a liability. It's an implicit liability, so you're not going to write out a check for it necessarily, but it's kind of built into your rates for the rest of the city, everybody that's still working and covered under the city's health insurance. It's very similar to your pension liability. And if you've been hearing me talk about that in the last few years, does that answer your question?
I have a whole list of questions.
Well, keep interrupting me as we go.
I actually read the reports.
Okay.
And I'll tell you, I could have had a month to go through them there. And I don't understand all of it, and so I had some questions. That was the biggest one. The other question I have is, it looks like our expenses are exceeding income, and I'm not quite certain about that because I don't read it that well. I'm also concerned about what is an abatement bond versus an assessment bond?
Okay, so I'm not sure about, in some of your funds, you did have expenditures exceed the overall revenues of those funds. Some of that was planned to spend down either fund balance or closing funds.
Talk about those as we go.
Yeah, and
We'll talk about those as we go along.
All right.
Yeah, I do have slides that kind of cover all your general fund, your special revenue funds, your capital project funds as we go through it. And I'll kind of touch on some of the highlights that we saw there as well. As far as your bonding question, the abatement bond versus the assessment bond is how that bond is being paid for, essentially. So an abatement bond, those taxes that normally would have gone towards your general fund, your regular levy, that portion of those taxes is carved out of your general levy and is being used to pay for a specific bond. An assessment bond, again, is similar. There's assessments on those properties that had improvements because of the debt that was taken out and the improvements made. Okay. Those assessments come in, and then they pay down the debt on that.
Good. Thank you.
Absolutely. So I left off with the non-current assets. These are your primarily your capital assets of the city: infrastructure, streets, equipment, buildings, those types of items. You saw a big increase there in 2020 compared to 2019. In 2020, you had more work done at the amphitheater, so that obviously was a very big project for the city. You saw increases there, as well as other improvement projects around the city. I think the 2nd Street North improvement project was done. There's capital equipment purchases, public safety, public works, trucks, squad cars, turnout gear. There's just a lot of capital activity in the city in 2020. Moving to the bottom half of that statement of net position, your current liabilities, these would be your kind of routine bills, accounts payable, salaries, wages payable, those types of items. You did see a decrease in 2020 compared to 2019. Another item that's in there is contracts payable. And at the end of 2019, there was a lot of bills outstanding, waiting on pay requests and improvement of pay requests for the amphitheater fund, or the amphitheater project, excuse me. And those decreased at the end of 2020 with that project being farther along. And then your long-term liabilities. So your net pension liability, this is the liability that the city is secondarily liable for PERA pension. That did increase. That's very heavily impacted by actuarial assumptions and guesses, I guess is what I would say, versus actual experience. So what you see in some of those increases there is what the actuaries thought was going to happen in 2020 and what actually did happen in 2020 with PERA's investments were a little bit different. So they underperformed If you remember, at the end of 2020, with the COVID pandemic, the stock market wasn't doing that great. Most people's investments were not doing that great. Paras was not immune to that. We talked about the OPEB liability a little bit earlier. Your other long-term liabilities is primarily your debt. So bonds, compensated absences, things like that. You did see a decrease in your other non-current liabilities. Primarily, there's no new debt issued in 2020, and you continue to make your required debt service payments throughout the year. So the expectation was that that balance would go down, and it did. The net position of the city. So if you could sell all the assets of the city and pay off all your debts, this is kind of what would be left over. You see you had an increase in 2020 compared to 2021. That's a trend you've seen. You've been building that net position for several years. A good chunk of it is invested in capital assets, so your infrastructure, the amphitheater project, equipment, buildings, those types of items. So it's not really in a spendable form as far as your net position, but you did see an increase there as you're continuing to improve and replace those assets. So that's the city as a whole, all operations, all funds, everything in kind of one neat column. On page 4, we'll move into the individual funds of the city. Starting with the general fund, it's the main operating fund of the city. And we look here on page 4, we look at your cash balances in the general fund in the previous 4 years to kind of see where the trends have been. You saw a pretty significant increase in your overall cash balance of the general fund. A lot of that is due to effects of the operations of the general fund, but there was also several funds, old project funds, that were closed out in the year with those projects being completed. There was some excess cash in those funds. It was transferred over to the general fund. And then on page 5, we look at the activity of the general fund, the revenues, expenditures, and your overall fund balance. You can see here, 2020 was a big year for the general fund. And what's recorded in there that kind of has that large jump, or it's causing that large jump in 2020, is the state of Minnesota reimbursement for the amphitheater project. It was a $5 million reimbursement. It was receipted into the general fund, because that's now the operating fund for the amphitheater, and then transferred out of the general fund to the project fund to help cover those costs of the project. In your fund balance, your overall fund balance, you see there's an increase again in 2020, and that's it's a healthy fund balance. You're looking at that in months worth of expenditures. That's kind of a metric we like to use as auditors to see how healthy that fund is and how it could sustain some hard times. If there are ever remittances and property taxes from the county, or LGA is not a huge part of your budget, but if that were to be the case. So as far as months worth of expenditures in your general fund, you're looking at about 8 months. So if your revenue streams all dried up in the general fund, you could float for about 8 months worth of recurring operating costs of the city before you would have to find or start borrowing from other funds or find another source of revenue. And speaking of revenues, on page 6, we look at the general fund revenues again for 2020 and the prior 4 years. And we look at these by source. So what's the source of the revenue of the general fund, the money that it's going to spend to keep the city operating? Some big changes in 2020 compared to the prior years. Intergovernmental revenues, this is your largest change in 2020. This is revenues from the federal government, state government, the county. There's a few things in there. Obviously, we talked about the state reimbursement or state contribution towards the amphitheater project. There's also the CARES Act funds in 2020 that the city received. That was about $890,000 between the state and the county contributions towards the city. So that's another reason why that balance jumped up so high in 2020. Now looking forward in 2021 and 2022, you'll still see some of those American Rescue Plan dollars coming into the city, likely in the general fund, because that's where they'll be spent. So that may be artificially high for the next few years, depending on what the next stimulus legislation is, I guess. Then the other financing sources also on that page took a big jump in 2020 compared to 2019. This is those transfers into the general fund of those old project funds that were closed out when those projects were completed. Moving to the next slide, page 7. We look at the expenditures, and we look at this by department. What department's using the revenues of the general fund? Public safety, public works have historically been your largest departments within the general fund. That's really no change in 2020. What can change or what can really impact these departments is the capital purchases that are made and which fund is getting that new equipment item, those improvements in whatever specific year we're looking at. And you see public safety had an increase in 2020. New squad cars, equipment, turnout gear for the firefighters. Those things are all purchased in 2020. You shouldn't have to do that necessarily every year. And then Public Works also had an increase. Trucks, snow plows, a new loader was purchased for the Public Works Department. So you're starting to see the impact those capital purchases can have on the individual department from year to year. And then the other financing uses, this is the transfer out of the state of Minnesota's contribution to the capital project fund for the amphitheater. So that's your general fund. Now I'll move into the special revenue funds on page 8. And these special revenue funds are kind of funds for a specific purpose within the city. The hope is that they'll be self-sustaining and can support that activity and that program from year to year. The local sales tax is by far your biggest special revenue fund, has the most activity anyways. You can see here had an increase in fund balance compared to 2019. So that's good. And that special revenue, that local sales tax fund usually gets that receipts that local sales tax revenue in, and then that revenue is then transferred out to other funds around the city for usually regional improvement projects. And you're seeing that again in 2020. Maybe not to the level in the prior years, but still being used for that purpose. And then on page 9, we got to look at your TIF funds, the tax increment financing districts. So TIF number 2, that's the fund that's used to service the 2014 A debt. So that's kind of got a large fund balance now, and as that debt continues to be paid down, it'll continue to draw down on that TIF district fund balance. And then there's a new TIF district in 2020, TIF 3-1. So it started receiving some of those tax increment financing revenues into the district, into the city, and then obviously paying developers as well for their portion. So it has a little bit of activity. I would assume that's going to grow as those property values continue to increase. Then on page 10, the capital project funds of the city. So amphitheater, that's been a big project for the last few years. Still had a lot of activity in 2020, but we're looking out ahead at when that project's kind of going to be done. I would assume in 2021, 2022 is when we start looking at, all right, is the majority of the construction work done, the bills paid, and that project could be closed out to either the general fund, a special revenue fund, or if you think there's going to be ongoing capital needs of the amphitheater, we can almost treat it like a revolving fund as things come up with running the amphitheater and equipment needs to be replaced or improvements need to be made. Then the Public Works facility, that project's been up and running that building's been up and running for a few years now. The 18th Avenue South, 2013 capital improvements, and the 17th Avenue South projects are all completed, considered done. We don't expect any more bills coming into those funds for those projects. So those are all closed out, again, to the general fund. And then on page 11, we move away from the governmental activities of the city into the more business type activities, and we'll start with the water fund. So these are my favorite funds to talk about when I come here to you because these slides really tell a great story. Starting on page 11, here's your cash and investment balances. Again, 2020 and the prior 4 years, it's been building up that cash balance in there. And the main source of that increase is due to just the profitability of operations of that fund. You're building up that reserve balance, which is, as you're going to see on the next slide, it's much needed for a utility fund when you start dealing with infrastructure and projects and replacements, repairs that can get very costly very quickly. So those funds are starting to get to that level where they can bear some of those costs that come up instead of having to borrow from the general fund like has been the case in the past. So the cash investment balance is looking very healthy now. Continue to monitor it, continue to review those rates because everything seems to get more expensive nowadays. So the water fund will have higher costs in years to come, I'm sure of it. And then on page 12, we look at the activity of the water fund, and this is kind of what I was referencing to just a moment ago. Looking at 2020, your overall revenues and expenses of the fund, and the net income and loss. So you see here in 2020, you had a loss in the water fund, and your expenses took a big jump compared to the prior years. It's been very consistent, 2019 and prior. And if you remember, well, maybe you talked about it with the water fund, the water tower maintenance that's needed to be done around the city. There's a new water tower maintenance contract that took effect in 2020. I think that was for the North Water Tower, if I remember right. That was a big expense that you hadn't had in the past. Now you're starting to do those maintenance items in the water fund. You can see there that it kind of narrows that margin and actually showed up with an operating loss during the year. One item I should mention included in these numbers is depreciation, or the wear and tear of your existing water infrastructure and assets. That's a non-cash expense, so that's why you see your cash balance increase a little bit when you're still not covering the costs of operating a water fund. Then on page 13, we look at the water fund and we do a little calculation here. That net income loss amount, we remove that non-cash expense, depreciation, so you can see the water fund's ability to pay its debt payments from the cash it's deriving from operations. So you're still bringing in enough cash from operations to pay that water fund debt, but you can see here with that additional expense that you've started incurring in the water fund for maintenance, that margin is narrowed quite a bit. And I think there's 4 years left on that water fund debt in that fund. So you still have to kind of maintain that margin, or you start eating into those water fund cash balances that you've been able to build up over the years. Then on page 14, we look at the sewer fund. Again, it's a very similar story to the water fund. You've been monitoring those rates, increasing those rates to build up cash balance and those reserves for obviously future capital replacement items. And that's largely, again, derived from operations. So as you look at your cash flow statement in your financial statements, you'll see where that cash is coming from. And then on page 15, similar to this water fund, we have the sewer fund activities. This one has historically operated in a little bit of a deficit. That's no change in 2020. You see your expenditures did decrease a little bit. The biggest expenditure of the fund is payments to the city of St. Cloud for their wastewater treatment plant. And that did decrease a little bit in 2020 as the city of St. Cloud, some of their debt on their sewer plant was paid off. Your portion of, or your contribution towards that debt each year did fall off as well. So you saw a little bit of a decrease in your expenses there. And then on the next slide, the stormwater fund. Again, similar story to the other two utility funds. It's building up that cash balance. Stormwater is becoming a larger part of the city's budget, just because nobody wants water in their basement. So you got to get the water somewhere. But that cash balance could be used very quickly for a large stormwater project. So I don't think it's quite at the point there where you feel comfortable saying the rates are where we need them to be. And the same thing, stormwater activity on page 17. There's relatively minor expenses in the fund during the year. Not a whole lot of stormwater projects were done, some minor repairs, things like that, but no major projects. So you see a little bit of a larger increase in your net position within that stormwater fund. And really, the stormwater, sewer, and the water funds, you've done a great job maintaining, reviewing those rates each year to make sure that they're at an appropriate level for what's going to come up in the future in those expenditures. So I highly recommend you keep doing that, stay on top of those water rates, because if you neglect them, they can very quickly revert back, or those funds can very quickly revert back to being needing to borrow cash from other funds to stay afloat. So that's the overall funds, the numbers of the city I was going to cover. In addition to auditing the balances in the city's general ledger, we also look at compliance of the cities. We look at compliance with a few different items, compliance with state statutes, compliance, with government auditing standards, and then this year, a new item you probably saw in your statements is compliance with the use of federal funds. So starting with Minnesota legal compliance, these cover things like conflicts of interest, disbursements, taking out debt, contracts and bidding. We're happy to report we came across no issues of noncompliance within the city. That usually tells us two things as auditors. One, that the laws are known to your team here at the city, and two, that to make sure they're being followed. So hats off to Shauna and Keith and Carla and the whole crew here for making sure that they're staying in compliance with state laws. Government auditing standards, this is, we look at internal control and how financial information flows through the city. We came across no material weaknesses there, no compliance issues noted. So again, staying on top of the kind of the segregation of duties, the checks and balances, making sure those are being followed. We're seeing that from your team here as well. And then on page 19, the single audit or the compliance with the use of federal funds. So because you received so much federal money in 2020, the threshold $750,000, you went above that. You had to have an audit on the use of the city's use of federal funds by program. So the Coronavirus Relief Fund, there's a myriad of compliance requirements that came along with accepting that money and using that money. And we're happy to report that we came across no issues with the Department of Treasury's guidance being followed by your team here at the city. So again, good job to them. And then the last couple items I want to cover are not necessarily audit related or numbers related, but it's a letter from us to us as auditors to you at the city to kind of let you know how the audit went, the audit process, any difficulties we encountered, corrected misstatements, disagreements we had with management. We're happy to report we had no difficulties with your personnel or disagreements that we could not resolve. And then we'd like to talk about maybe a few recommendations. So one thing we had this year was timely bank reconciliations. The bank reconciliation is kind of that last check in your month-end close, year-end close to make sure that all the activity that happened in the city's bank account is accounted for in your general ledger. And with your software implementation that started a few years ago, we're still seeing some bugs in that system, as well as turnover of key personnel here at the city who were trained on your new accounting software, subsequently left. That delayed that process. And when there's a delay in that process, there's a delay in the financial reporting to the state auditor, or in this case, especially with this year, the federal government. You know, the use of their funds, they want to know how that money's spent. They have a reporting form, and they have a deadline for that. So we've been working with the city, Shauna, Keith, Carla, on what's the best way to make sure that process gets done timely. And I know they're making progress, especially in the last few weeks, getting current with those bank reconciliations. Really, that's being implemented and it's being put in place. And we're hoping next year for the 2021 audit, we can come here in May and June versus October to talk to you. So with that, on the last slide is my contact information. So if you're looking at through some of the stuff in your free time and you think I should have asked Justin this, or I wish I would have asked him that, feel free to reach out, call, email, or if you're ever driving through Litchfield, stop in the Litchfield office. I'm usually there. So at this time, does anybody else have any questions or anything else I didn't cover tonight?
Just one more quick question.
Yep.
When I'm looking at the sewer fund and I see that we have a net income loss, it's an enterprise fund. Do we cover that loss with general fund dollars?
No, you don't really need to cover that. Like I said, again, similar to the water fund, a lot of that is depreciation or a non-cash expense. So you're almost deferring the maintenance on your sewer infrastructure to a future period by not covering that cost. So you're almost, if you can cover your depreciation costs within a utility fund, you're kind of building up the funds needed to pay for that replacement in the future. So while your cash balance is looking great in the sewer fund, you're not quite covering all those depreciation costs for what you're going to need to replace, who knows, 5-10 years from now.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Any other questions?
Vic, did that answer your questions
Yes.
on the other funds too? Because a lot of those other funds that you were showing the negative was because they were being closed out.
Okay. No, I understand.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Any other questions, council? Otherwise, I need a motion to approve the fund transfers in the 2020 audit report.
I would move.
Oh, hold on.
I just want to get back to my, and you just got to give me a minute, because
Had it.
back to share, sorry. I just want to make sure that we're addressing people. There we go. Now
Our-
we can go on to.
Our video people.
Yeah, so, sorry, but we can't just be as quick as,
We are.
no,
All right.
here we go, here's your motion.
I still need that motion.
I so move.
Second.
Further discussion.
So just to clarify, Just to clarify that the motion is to approve the fund transfers and to accept the 2020 audit report.
As presented.
That's exactly what I said.
Oh, okay.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passed unanimously.
All
Thank
right,
you.
thank you very much.
Vic made the motion, I second.
All right, item B, request approval moratorium mining and excavation use. John?
Council members, I'll present this request. This is a staff-driven request from myself. In short, the city has seen a pretty significant increase in interest for interim use permits associated with mining or extractive uses, and that can run the gamut from a gravel pit to a temporary quarry operation to a longer-term quarry operation. In the last few years, we've seen a 20-year gravel pit on the western fringe of town, as well as a couple shorter-term granite quarries on the eastern fringe on Granite View Road. Due to the city's ground conditions, I don't think it's any shock to anybody that we have significant areas of pockets of granite, as well as potential sand areas that tend to kind of correlate with river areas that generate interest for pulling those materials out. And I would expect that if we leave this unchecked, we will likely continue to see additional applications for various areas in the A1 agricultural rural residential area that we have quite a bit of that fringe outlying area that we are kind of working on long-term planning for those areas. And I think that the unchecked mining request or extractive use request could create potential conflicts or issues with both long-term planning for that area as well as potential impacts to residents that neighbor those projects. One of the projects we have has created some unforeseen impacts to neighbors that we didn't really account for, that I didn't account for well enough, and now I'm trying to work through after the fact, which is a challenge unto itself. We did have a recent project that was slated for review by Planning Commission last week, but that was actually withdrawn by the applicant after we had some significant concerns raised by Stearns County and the Minnesota DNR that ultimately led to a recommendation of denial for that particular proposal. So part of what I'd like to do is request that moratorium to allow for a period of 1 year, 12 months, to allow staff time to review our existing ordinance, look at alternatives, which way I would recommend going, perhaps lay out a couple options for review at by the city council and some input at a future work session. I'm not ruling anything out at this time. Whenever we do these sorts of things, it's always on a spectrum. You never go in with a firm that I'm going to absolutely do this or that. There's always it runs from the options of no change to basically taking it out of the ordinance entirely, and could be anything in between. So what I would like to do is propose that moratorium for a period of 12 months to allow some time for research, make some recommendations, and bring it before the council at a future work session for input before we would take it through the whatever we would come up with, take that through the planning commission and the ultimate city council review, whatever direction that may take. So I would request approval of the moratorium as presented for the duration of 12 months.
Council? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, just a clarifying question. During a moratorium review, if there were any changes made to the zoning regulations, would that go through a public hearing process?
As far as,
If out of the moratorium, there were any changes made to the zoning ordinance?
yes, any changes made, you don't have to take it to the planning commission to issue the moratorium, but because the mining and extractive use, it falls under the zoning ordinance. If there's any changes proposed, it would go to the planning commission for input, that they make the recommendation in turn to the city council for those unfamiliar with it.
Council, any questions for John?
Under our present comp plan that we're working on, or have in place, in those areas that they're talking about the mining or of this, that's a non-allowable thing in those, under the comp plan, isn't it?
under our comp plan in some areas, potentially, but we have to go by the existing zoning of those areas. So that's the default. Mining and extractive uses are considered an interim use permit in the A1 areas. I don't think that there was ever an expectation that we would see as many as we have right now, especially in the relatively short duration. That's why it's kind of throwing a flag in my mind that, you know, it might be time to take a look at it.
Well, it seems like when one person asks for a special project, which is out that way, it seems like everybody wants to jump on board then, kind of like the solar deal.
Yeah, I understand the desire, and in some, you know, it's hard to fault anyone for wanting to do something with their property that they stand to make money, but at the same time, you know, my charge is to look at the welfare of the city as a whole. So we have to look out for those that are nearby, and part of what I'm working through is learning that firsthand. You know, we have a project that created some unfortunate side effects that I didn't really account for as through that review process, for better or worse, but you know, I'm trying to avoid a repeat of that with any future project. So I think at a minimum, you know, whether the ordinance changes or is ultimately eliminated, I think at a minimum, I would encourage some severe restrictions. I don't know if severe might not be the proper term, but some more diligent approval, submittal requirements for any future projects that, you know, lay out things a little more thoroughly and don't necessarily leave it up to staff to kind of make interpretations. You know, I'm not an expert in mining by any means, so I kind of, like any other business, I have to rely kind of on what I'm told and what I go off of. But what I've learned is that sometimes that's just not good enough for what we need. So I think there's a chance to, you know, try and tighten up both the submittal requirements and the review requirements to ensure that we're doing it right by any future projects. But I'm not going to rule out the option either that I may recommend just foregoing future projects entirely, because, you know, at what point do we have enough eggs in one basket? You know, I think that there might be projects where, you know, we might have to make some accommodation for very short-term quarrying or removal type uses, because we do it ourselves. You know, we built the amphitheater. Part of that is pulling rock out and removing that. But I think that's a different animal than removing material with the intent of selling it and making a profit. You know, and those are the things I think need to be accounted for, that our existing ordinance isn't as well suited for it as I'd like.
All right, council, any other questions?
I'll make a motion to approve the moratorium for 12 months.
To approve the moratorium on interim use permits associated with mining and extractive uses. All right.
That's what I said.
I'll second it.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passed unanimously. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
All right, item C, request for approval of nuisance abatement, 124 Second and a Half Streets North.
Move to approve.
Oh, hold on. Maybe? What did I do? Sorry. I gotta figure out how to make this bigger. Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure. How in the world did this get done this way? I'm trying to make it bigger. But there we go. It's a little better. Sorry, I can't move as fast as you guys can make motions sometimes.
There you go. All right. Request for approval of nuisance abatement, 124 2.5 Street North.
Council members, this is, it's a relatively common nuisance but it's a little more severe than most. This property has been sent notice twice in the last few months, August 11th, September 11th at the follow-up, as well as the notice of this meeting and abatement request. It has a couple of junk vehicles parked scattered around the property, junk in the nature that they have expired tabs. I don't know if they run or not. Part of the problem with this property is the issue, as well as not being corrected at all, has also gotten more severe as time has worn on. There's a picture you'll see below in one of the notices that a blue Hyundai showed up fairly recently just off the alley with a broken rear window, obviously what we consider a attractive nuisance. There's that's right off a public alley on that stretch. Don't know where it came from. It showed up a couple weeks ago. Also, not pictured as a bagster, one of those waste management bag dumpsters that's overflowing, not been picked up. Moves around the yard somehow, but hasn't been picked up at all. So, as the last I checked on the way in a few hours ago, at a minimum, the blue broken window, broken down car was still there. So I assume that there may be other issues as well. I hadn't had a chance to take a closer look, but as of right now, at least that issue remains. So the abatement request I would keep it standing.
Move to approve the abatement request.
And that is done by resolution.
Yep, approve the resolution. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Just for
Opposed?
reference, we'll set date and time after the fact and notice the property. When we do that, we have an officer present just for oversight and make it all go away, and we'll bill everything back.
So you send them a letter, the date and time of which you are coming?
Yeah, we will, yes. I have to coordinate with the services that we need to make
Sure,
sure they can all be
to
on
get
site
rid
at
of
one
it,
time.
yeah.
Could take a little work sometimes.
Just for clarification, that they're not a renter there, they own that property. is
I
that
believe so,
correct?
yes.
All right. Review and approve bills.
You had a motion and a second. Did you have a?
Yeah, I think, all in favor?
Aye.
I don't know where I got lost.
I don't know either, but I just
Thought we
wanted to make
approved it.
sure.
I did too, but I thought.
You might have, and I might have missed it.
Opposed? Passed unanimously. Now, review and approve bills.
Move to pay the bills.
I'll second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passed unanimously. Have anything? Shauna?
The only thing that I wanted to just mention is upcoming is the CGMC Fall Conference, which is in Wilmer this year, being the summer conference was held in Alexandria. And the dates of that are November 18th and 19th. So I'll send it out to you again, but I just wanted to mention that if you're interested in attending. You want to go, Mike?
Anybody else gonna
No,
go?
won't
I do
go.
know that, yeah, the hotel reservations were something that we needed to take care of soon because one hotel was full already, so I'm like, wow,
I won't be there.
okay. All right, but I'll send it out to you in the next day or so, and then you can let me know, but just wanted to get that in the back of your mind. And then our next council meeting will be November 1st.
All right. John, you got anything?
No, sir.
John, do you have anything more?
Nothing additional, sir.
Carla? Paul?
No, sir.
All right, then we are adjourned at 7:24.